All right. Well, happy, beautiful, amazing day. Dr. Bob Rakowski here, wellness transformation expert. Today's podcast is going to be a co-podcast. I've got naturopath, amazing, fantastic, epic Dr. Tracy Stroop. We met a year ago, and I've got to tell you, we speak the same language from the word go. She brings in a different set of beautiful energy than I have, and I love the synergy that we're creating. I think most of you know me, but now 33 years clinical practice, taught over 10,000 hours of seminars on 6 different continents, every range of patients from elite professional athletes to those sent home to die. And thankfully, many of those are alive decades later. And Dr. Tracy and I speak the same word, knowing that hope may be the most powerful thing, probably second only to love, right? But we're going to have a wonderful conversation around hope and love, and then the nitty gritty of why we're not doing so well and what we can do about it. And Dr. Tracy, I don't know that anybody can do your introduction justice, but I'm going to let you give a shot at it because you know you better than anybody.
Well, thank you. And I'm so glad to be here and kind of co-hosting this with you. So my podcast is Eat, Pray, Faith with Tracy Stroop, ND. And I recently launched it. So it's been a great place. And like you said, a great place to provide a place of hope. You know, there's a lot of podcasts and information out there about all the things that are going to take us down, Bob, right? Where Dr. Bob and Dr. Tracy, we're going to speak hope today. So I'm excited. We just presented together at a venue about 2 weeks ago, which was wonderful. And I thought it was amazing that our presentations were so similar, although we didn't talk to each other prior to the event. So we do speak the same language, and I'm so glad to be doing this with you.
Well, the honor's mine. I want to bridge over to this concept of hope for just a moment. Yeah, you used a term which has been used, and it's sadly accurate: fear porn.
Yeah.
So, what are you seeing with that horrific concept? What's going on out there? What are you seeing? And then I'll add my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think the best way to manipulate anybody is through pain or pleasure. And so, if you can get people into a state of pain or fear, which is a form of pain, you will get their attention for sure. And over the last 3.5 years, I always said the spirit of fear was the same on both sides. This whole pandemic that came around, people were scared of the virus, people were scared of the vaccine, people were scared on both sides. It's the same spirit of fear. What I tried to step in to do was, just speak a voice of power, as what God gives us. We have a spirit of power. And I think what has happened is we've had some really astounding influencers that are beautiful. And I'm so glad that they were a voice of truth. But then all of a sudden, they just carried it on. And not all of them, but some of them just kept going with this fear mongering of every single thing you had to look at and research. And there was just no grace in it. And there was certainly no solutions offered. And if it was a solution, it was a one-off solution. It was a very specific solution, and it worked for everybody and everything. I mean, one of the things that I heard a lot about was intermittent fasting, right? Everyone should do that had long haul COVID or was injured should do intermittent fasting. And I think intermittent fasting is great, but for the right person at the right time. So I think what you and I had done was put a solution set in place where we were like, hey, let's start with foundations. Let's start with a mindset change, because if you're living in fear, you absolutely cannot get to healing. And then let's put in the right protocols, the products, the modalities. And we had a set system that brought people from fear into hope and health. And so that's what I saw. And there wasn't enough people speaking that language, saying, hold on a second. It's not this one thing it's going to get us. It was a lifetime of these habits that you had, lifestyle that you had. And this was the straw that broke the camel's back. But we have the ability to heal. And that's the miracle in itself. It's just the simple ability of healing is a miracle. And we have to embrace it. So that's what I saw.
Now, I want to share similar observations. I have a patient that became very, very wealthy as a salesman. And you won't like his answer, but it goes along with what we're talking about here. I said, so what made you so successful as a salesman? He said, look, nothing sells like fear. Yeah. If I could get him fear of missing out, fear of this, fear of that, then I had a much greater probability of the sale. When we start talking about hope, I had a guy stage 4 pancreatic cancer, sent home to die, critically ill, doing absolutely horrible. And I've got a video of him on my YouTube channel, put him on a 2-week protocol. And I asked him, 0, no change, 100, perfect, ideal. How much better are you? He says, 90%. I said, wow. Come on, how's that even possible? He says, Bob, I was so weak, I couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't control my bowels. Life was just purely miserable. I was welcoming death. He says, but oh my gosh, everything is so much better. My color's back. Everybody's noticing. I said, how wonderful. And he said, I asked him, do you have any advice for future patients? He says, yeah, don't lose hope.
Right.
And so, when you and I talk about solutions, the straw that broke the camel's back, whether we call it the stress bucket overflowing, however we want to look at it, look, we got to eat right, drink right, think right, move right, sleep right, poop right, talk right every day, and recognize we're mental, physical, emotional, spiritual, social, financial, impactful beings. So why would we focus on one thing and think we're ever going to have a complete life? Now, we will always have a starting point, but, and I often tell this story at my seminars, I used to think way back when in clinical practice, I'd ask myself the question, what is the one thing I can do that'll get this patient the biggest return on investment for their efforts? And then one of my mentors pointed out, Bob, aren't you asking what's the least you can do to get the most? Why don't you ask what's the most you can do? And that was a paradigm shift that paid big dividends in every area of my life. What's the most we can do? So let's pivot that right back to you. So when you're looking at people, how do you figure out what's the most you can do and maybe the best starting point?
Yeah, well, I think it comes from, and I love that line when you said it at the event, that I wrote it down because I was like, you know what? That is what we're asking. We're asking what is the most that we can do for someone. I think the first thing is giving hope, listening, just being a sounding board for all the trials and tribulations that they've gone to, and then repositioning it. For me, I always try to reposition that my body's defective, I'm sick, it's breaking down, to hold on, your body never does anything wrong. It was designed to save your life. That's why you're still here. And praise God, you're still alive. All right, let's start from there. And then we start to look at how do we calm the immune system, calm the mind, just get everything into, like you always say, your stress reset, which I think is one of the things that last year when I heard you speak, I implemented that. And it does come down to just getting people in the right mind frame. And that stress reset for probably 99.9% of people is really what they need, because they're walking in a state of fight or flight, whether or not they're just trying to lose weight or they have a stage 4 metastatic cancer. It's a fight or flight with their body because it's an internal dwelling and dealing. And so for me, I try to give a position of your body's doing everything right to save your life. Let's give it glory. Let's be like, go body, you're still here. It hasn't quit on you. So if it hasn't quit, we're not going to quit. So that's kind of how I try to reposition everything.
Well, I love that you bring in this concept of listening, because let's face it, it's a lost art in the world, but maybe most lost in what they're trying to call healthcare, which we both know isn't. It's sick management for profit. And I recall, the early functional medicine courses, they pointed out that there was a survey that was done, and it was, more like a study. They'd go in and see, okay, how long could a patient start telling their story to a primary care provider before they were interrupted? And the first time that study was done, it was 18 seconds. They had 18 seconds and, okay, I've heard enough, here's your prescription. Well, then fast forward a decade later, congratulations, they improved. They were up to like 22 seconds before they were interrupting. And by the way, I've had plenty of visits where people are going on and on. I schedule for an hour and we're 45 minutes in, and I might say, every part of this story is important. I want you to make sure that you say everything and that you're heard. Today, we have 15 more minutes, and then I've got to get on to someone else. So my next question for you is, do you want to continue the story now, or should we move into some type of intervention, some type of physical exam, some type of treatment? And sometimes they just want to keep talking, and then we schedule another follow-up. And often those people that spend that whole hour talking, they feel like for the first time in their life, they've been heard, or at least maybe the first time by a healthcare provider. Right. And how wonderful is that? So, when they're talking, people can get on different tangents. Do you have a loving way that you like to kind of bring them back to center? How are we going to get on topic here? Or?
Well, I think what you just said was great. Listen, edify, and then align, right? You got to get back to the goal of the consult. And they're there and they know they've spent good money to come see you or come see me. So I'll usually say exactly what you said, like, wow, this has been quite a journey. Like, I'm going to edify their journey and say, I'm really sorry that up until this point, no one has really listened to your story, because I think it's fascinating. Let's use the rest of this time to just correlate a little bit of a plan of what we're going to do together. And walking out, it might be one supplement and a few nutrition changes. Like, hey, let's pull away some inflammatory foods. Let's add in this multivitamin. It might be super simple, but I will talk to them about what can they do, what will they do, and what can they afford to do. That's always in my first consult. So, what can you do? Well, a single mom of 4 kids, and maybe one of her children is on the spectrum, can do a lot of different things than a married woman who doesn't have any children and has endless financials, right?
Yep.
So that's a very different what can you do? What will you do? Some people are not ready 100% to commit because you pick your hard, right? It's really hard to be sick, but it's really hard to get healthy. So I'll talk to them about what will you do? Will you cut out these things? Will you take a drastic right turn? Or are we still just, kind of going around the bend? What will you do? And then what can you afford to do? That's a big one because I will phase out my protocols depending on what financially people can afford. Now, I usually position it with your health is valuable. This is an investment. You would go get a loan for a car. Let's just think about where you're putting your money and your debt. But when it comes to your own personal health, people are unwilling to lay out the money because we've been indoctrinated to think that sick care policy is going to take care of us. But we know that it ensures nothing. And I don't know what benefit comes from it, but that's a whole different podcast. So when I talk to them about what will they do, I do set up health budgeting expectations. This is how much your next testing is going to cost. I'm looking at this phase protocol because I think this is the underlying issue. But first, we have to modulate the inflammation and get the immune system. And here's the products that I like to use to do that. So you're looking at X amount of money each time you come in. Is that okay? And most of the time, people are like, yes, because now they have a mental health frame of I need to save my pennies and take away my non-organic chemical-laden coffee that I get every day and maybe cut down on buying the chips and maybe not spend so much money at the convenience store. And they start to health budget. And I'll ask them that question, where are some money wasters? What do you waste money on? Do you go get a coffee every day? Do you eat out at lunch? So we start talking about how do we get the money to invest back into their health rather than give it away to everything that's detracting from their health. So those are the things that I do in that first consult to get the talker to come back in so that when they walk out, they feel heard, they feel edified, and they have this alignment of my practitioner cares about me as much as I care about me. My practitioner cares about what I can do, what I will do, and what I can afford to do. And I just have those conversations right at the front.
Well, I love that. And by the way, one of my early errors, and I think a lot of people made it, was actually caring more about the patient's outcome than they cared about, right? So some people just have this limitation where they're there. One of my favorite authors is Andy Andrews. And he wrote a book called Little Things. I don't know if you ever read anything by him, but I highly recommend him. Entertaining, brilliant, faith-based, just a sharp character. And he talks about change. And he says, there's a lot of myths to change. No, you don't have to hit rock bottom. You don't have to be at the end of your rope. All you need is 2 things. He said, number 1, what's in it for me? And then number 2, social proof. So what I like to do with these patients is we sit down and we say, okay, here's the path you're on. We see where this is going, and it's not too hard to track people's trends. Your kidneys have been going down. You're progressively anemic. You're progressively inflamed. Even your body weight, you gained 35 pounds over the last 20 years. We can't keep doing that. And then ultimately, the other thing is social proof. So what's in it to you? You get your life back. You get your health back. You get your vitality back. Sometimes you get your love life back. And where's the proof? Well, I take a lot of videos and I put a bunch of those on YouTube, et cetera, because people need to know. I came into this office. I had this protocol and here's where it happened. But I also let them know their protocol isn't your protocol. So we are very good at customizing. And I always use the analogy, if people are stuck in the mud and someone comes by and gives them a little push, or in the snow, depends on what part of the world you're in, and they hit the gas, they dig themselves a deeper rut. And so sometimes we start a process, they have a little die-off reaction there, that Hersheimer's response, they feel worse than when they started, and they think, this is not right. They've done something wrong. No. It's just maybe a little faster than what you need. But ultimately, I'll let them know if we do all the things we want to do and all the buffers, we have a greater probability of making it easy on you, but there's no guarantee anywhere in life. So when you start talking about, okay, let's say you're going to have someone stop something and start something. If we just, and a good friend of mine created this protocol, start one, stop one. He said, first days of January, find something to stop, something to start. What do you see as the most universal things people need to stop? And what are the universal things they need to start?
I would probably say people need to start more than they need to stop, right?
Okay.
Because I think, Dr. Bob, you and I came from this 20 years ago health genre era, right? That was all about deprivation. I mean, everything was like cutting calories, cutting fat, cut this out, cut this out. And I think people are far more educated. So what I usually try to do is use the crowd out mentality. Let's start doing some good things that are going to crowd out those poor habits. And we know most of the poor habits are due to deficiency, right? So if you're sleep deficient or deprived, you're going to go for more caffeine, more coffee, which is going to go after the adrenals. If you're deficient in elimination pathways, you don't have good bowel movements, whatever, you're going to be super high in toxicity, right? So sometimes we have to crowd out some things. And most people need to start going to bed earlier. They need to start moving in some way every day. They need to start putting in more food product, more than just like, fast food. And that's not food. As Jamie always says, there's no such thing as junk food. It's either junk or food, right? Food is life-sustaining, reproducible on its own, can reproduce life in you. They need to start thinking better. They need to start praying more. They need to start, all of the things that we talk about when you say, eat right, think right, move right, sleep right, poop right, all of those things. They need to start doing those. And I usually tell people, if you do those, you won't need me. If you do that foundation, if you start doing them better, you need me less, because I am simply 10% of your success. I'm a path pointer, I'm a map layer, but 90% of the work is whether or not they start doing something, which will cause them to stop doing something else. You get more sleep, you're not going to need a full pot of coffee, right? You start pooping, you're not going to have to do all those detox protocols. You start, exercising, you're going to stop wanting just to lay on the couch and feeling bad. And so I think it's more of a start mentality for me, because I came out of fitness. Everything was deprivation in fitness. I mean, we burnt up fat cells. We counted calories. Like, you weren't allowed to do anything in fitness. So when I got into natural health, I was like, you know what? I'm going to go with the abundance mentality. Let's put an abundance of goodness into our bodies and lives. And that will crowd out, because where there is light, there can be no darkness. So that's kind of my mentality.
Well, and we speak the same language with that, right? Let the light shine bright and fuel it with all goodness. If I were to answer that same question, I had a profoundly wealthy, powerful, amazing, balanced patient years ago give me a book called The Greatest Salesman in the World by Og Mandino. And he says, Bob, this will change your life. And I remember the scroll about love. And one of the lines was, and most of all, I will love myself, for when I do, I will zealously inspect all things that I allow to enter my mind, my heart, my soul, and my body. I thought, to this date, I don't know that I've read anything more powerful than that statement. So if I were to get people to start something, hey, look, we are all brothers and sisters. We're all from the same source. God made all of us, and God doesn't make junk. So honor that. And as you come to that realization, and you're here for some special purpose, and if you get quiet and can listen, maybe you find that purpose. I'd like them to, first of all, love themselves. And if I were to say stop something, how about the toxic input or the fear porn? Hey, don't even turn on that news and shut off anything on your computer or phone that's going to be notifications from any type of news service, because that's what they're selling. And so, we're on the same page with that. If they do zealously inspect everything, they're going to sleep. They're going to move. And that made me think of a book by Tom Rath called Eat, Move, Sleep. I don't know if you read that one, but pretty amazing. This was I think the grandson of the individual that started the Gallup polls. At age 15, he lost an eyeball to cancer. And the doctors told him, sorry, you lost a genetic lottery. There's tumors in your lungs, your liver, your kidneys, your adrenals, your spleen, everywhere. You won't see your 37th birthday. How they came up with 37, who knows? Well, Tom Rath is 45. He's Amazon's best-selling author. That first book, Eat, Move, Sleep, what he figured out was when I eat, like you described, if it's life-giving food, he's okay. If he doesn't, his tumors grow, and he gets scanned every 6 months. Move the right amount for him. Now, keep in mind, when you're not in shape, hey, a walk across the street and back might be your starting point, not a marathon. And then finally, sleep. He budgets, and now we have sleep trackers. I'm wearing my Oura Ring right now, but he said he would budget 10 hours every single night to sleep, to get 8 hours of sleep. And now, 45, 46, 47, whatever it is these days, he's the picture of health, By the way, they told him, don't even think about getting married and having kids because you give this horrible disease to your kids. He has two beautiful girls, no genetic issues. So if we honor ourselves, somehow we bring honor to the world.
No, I totally agree with that. I think sometimes the Western side, because they're not taught hope in school. They're taught diagnostics. They're taught pharmaceutical repression or organ removal. I mean, those are the three pathways. So someone walks out of your office, they either have a diagnosis, a pharmaceutical, or they're scheduled for surgery. And that's really the three paths out. With what we do, the path out is total healing, hopefully, right? At least there is a hopeful pathway when they walk out of here. But this is why, I guess, when you asked me the question before, and probably why you feel the same, is I feel like the system, not the people in the system, there are great doctors, there are great nurses, PAs, everybody, but the system is a prison. It creates a lifelong pharmaceutical user, a lifelong person that's going to hang on to that system of repression. I always say that, it starts with childhood jabs, and from there you create a lifelong pharmaceutical user. And that's kind of how it goes. Even with us in our industry, if you think about it, how many people walk into your office, Bob, and have a bag full of supplements that they're on? And they sit down and they have this huge bag and they want you to go through it and tell them what to take and what not to take. And I think it's overwhelming for me, let alone them. I mean, supplements are meant to be supplemental during a process or a phase of healing and to complement a foundational lifestyle that's going to support health, growth, and feeling great. So how do you deal with those people that continue to add supplements to their protocols? Because I personally think that we over-supplement as well sometimes.
Well, yeah, there's no doubt about that. So I would share a cartoon that I created when I would teach diagnostics and nutrition. And I would have a woman coming in. She had this whole shopping bag full of supplements. And she says, well, doctor, with all these supplements I take, why do I still feel so lousy? And there's a lot of answers to it. One, they might be lousy supplements, period, end of story. There's a lot of bad actors that are putting stuff out there. Maybe fewer now, but guess what? When people are buying stuff on the internet, I personally know of 3 people that died buying something on the internet that was laced in fentanyl. So goodness. No, don't buy anything to consume, on the internet, unless of course, exactly where it's coming from, USDA certified organic, GMP and know the source, because it's too easy to get fraudulent with that. But then if you're not addressing the underlying issues, and then the one overriding thing that I would see way back then, the sickest people I would see had the worst acid alkaline balance. Every hormone in our body is pH dependent. Every enzyme is pH dependent. I teach full day seminars on acid alkaline. We have at least a dozen proven buffers. Every biologic process that makes energy makes acid. And just for our listeners, when oxygen goes into the cell, carbon dioxide comes out, adds to water in the blood to form carbonic acid. Many trillions of cells doing that trillions of times a day. There's a reason why all of our elimination routes get rid of acid. And then another study showed that food contributes very little to acid burden. We eat amino acids, fatty acids, but those are very, very mild acids. But our foods, not adding to the burden, they build our buffers. And if you don't have good foods, you actually deplete the buffers rather than build them. So, when I think those are the more challenging cases. In some ways, they show up and they've already wasted a ton of time, money, and effort because they didn't go after the right thing. And I always find the solution to, if we do a good assessment, if we really understand how to dot the I's and cross the T's and understand the starting point, I'll never guarantee a success, but I promise you my success rate is in the high 90s in every demographic of patient. So if you want to be in that, why don't we put that on hold for a while? We'll start you on what we recommend after we understand your chemistry. And then if you want to start bringing that back, fine. But and I will tell probably one of the saddest but meaningful stories there. I had a woman like that come in a couple decades ago. It let it be a little longer than that, when I could actually precisely measure pH with something called a bioterrain analyzer, which, by the way, has been made illegal unless you're a highly complex lab now. But this woman came in with a whole big bag full of supplements. And when I did her bioimpedance analysis, where we get an evaluation back on tissue health, she was profoundly critically ill. She was just wasting away. And then when I looked at her acid alkaline balance, she was the most most acid woman I'd ever seen. And I'm sitting there thinking, and I really didn't think there was much hope for her. So I went through her supplements with her, and I asked her, I said, what do you enjoy doing? She says, I love my grandkids. I said, you know what? Laughter is the best medicine. There's nothing that heals like love. Spend as much time with your grandkids, focus on this supplement, that supplement, that supplement, and let's have another conversation next week. Well, she died the next day. And so sometimes there is a point of no return, but I hope she took that advice for that day, spent the time with the grandkids, and enjoyed that level of love. But now let's turn it back. Now you've got that same patient, not that one, but the one that comes in with the shopping bag, and their list of complaints is longer, than any encyclopedia you've ever looked at. What's your starting point with that patient?
Well, I think exactly what we said, right, is supplements are meant to be supplemental, and sometimes they can become a burden on the system as much as they can be helpful. If the best supplement that somebody needs is the one that they're deficient in. And so I will look at their supplements because they have spent a lot of money, and I'll tell them, we're just going to set this to the side. Let's talk first. Let me see what I find. And then if I can use anything in that bag that's quality, because I say the exact same thing, you want quality and integrity wrapped up into a supplement. It's really important, because if you're putting a little bit of poison into your body every single day, if it's not quality, that makes up a lot in a month, in a year, 2 years. And how long have people been on the same supplements? I mean, let's just take the recent pandemic of COVID. I think every single person was mega dosing C, zinc, D. I mean, think about it. And then they come in and they're still taking the exact same amounts 3 years later. And I'm like, hold on, have you tested any of your levels? So I will try to explain to them. And I honestly think they feel relief when you tell them, you don't need to take all these. We're going to take the ones that are really going to work for you. Now, I have an apothecary. I'm sure you have an apothecary, and I'll tell them, you don't want to throw those out. Stick them up on your shelf, right? Just have yourself a little apothecary for when you have emergencies. And what I teach them to do, and this may be old school and silly, but I tell them to get an 8-gallon Ziploc bag and write on it immune. And we're going to put the immune formulas in that bag and seal it, stick it on the shelf or in the refrigerator. And then we'll have, other ones like calming, and then other ones that'll say energy. And so we'll just put those formulas in there, digestion, so that they know, because sometimes they have so many supplements, they don't know what they do. And then it comes down to a text message to me or a message through, their client portal that's like, hey, Dr. Tracy, I'm starting to get a little bit of cough, cough, sniff, sniff. I broke out my immune protocol supplement, and I'll even have them make little cards that have how to take it. So they just stick that in the Ziploc. And maybe that's old school, but it helps a lot of people because we can go look at our shelf and we know we need this and we need this. I'm going to support my adrenals and I need this. But when someone's at home and they don't feel well, they're just not thinking. And so if they can pull down the immune bag and pull out the card and it says, here's how you take it, and they take it like that, and then they put everything back in the bag, it's totally easy for them. And they'll say, I started the immune protocol. Is there anything else I need? And I'll be like, nope, let's let something work. And that's how I usually finish that up with my bag lady. It walks in with all her supplements. I'm like, we're going to use just these and we're going to let it work. And let's see how far we can get just letting this work. Because I have to see what your body's potential is 30 days after taking this, 60 days. And this, yet we can add and subtract things. But the other thing is people are just jumping from supplement to supplement, like the next pill for my ill. It's no longer foundational and building, right, that house of health. They're just throwing stuff at the wall and hoping it sticks because one influencer says this and another influencer says that. And we are basically replicating what the medical system does. And all of a sudden, someone walks into your office on 7 to 14 medications. It's no better if they're walking into our office on 7 to 14 products. It's not, especially if they don't need it. So that's usually what I do.
You went to that bridge of influencer, and I'll share. I was at a functional medicine conference maybe 25 years ago. And 4-day conference, usually you sit in the same place. And the guy that was sitting next to me all 4 days. So finally, I just looked at him. I said, what do you do? He says, well, I write newsletters. I said, what are you doing here? He says, well, I write health newsletters. I said, tell me about that. He says, well, we find a doctor that has the right look and the right credentials. And our goal is to come up with one blockbuster product every single quarter. So what we'll do is we'll find the doctor with the right look. Andrew Weil certainly has the right look, right? Or whoever it would be. They'll fly him somewhere in the Amazon jungle. And then they'll be next to an elder that, you'll never believe this guy's 137 years old, right? I'm exaggerating that, but look how fit, look how happy. And I found the answer. It was under this rock, and it's this little moss, and it's not available anywhere else in the world. And yes, you can get it now because of our diligence. I looked into it. I made sure it's awesome. Well, that was all a bunch of lies. They were finding something that they could market in a way that people would buy it. And so I recall being at a conference, a fitness conference years ago, and they said, where do you see this industry going? And I said, well, good places, but we got to deal with the bad first, because every scammer realizes this is now $1 trillion industry, and they're going to find ways that are not necessarily noble to sell rather than serve. And that's where you and I resonate beautifully, as we want to serve first. So little bridge on this, and I think I know your answer, and then we'll get a little more complicated. So we have 7 life areas: mental, physical, emotional, spiritual, social, financial, impactful. Which one of those do you think is the greatest starting point for most people?
Well, the greatest starting point is probably faith, and then emotion, and then physical, right? So you have to have something to believe in. You have to have hope. That's where hope comes from, is from a level of faith. Your emotional state has to be balanced. I'm not saying that people won't get scared during disease or even frustrated, angry. I mean, emotions are normal. We just don't want them to dwell as the basis of what we're thinking or feeling every day. And then the physical, right? Which is very important, obviously. I think the world is very used to taking care of the physical first. And then maybe looking at the emotional. And then if all else goes wrong, we're suddenly jumping into faith and praying that we get better. And I think if we would flip the relationship and be like, all right, I have great faith even in my trials and tribulations. I have to keep my eyes on, and my ears and my mind and my thoughts on God, and stay in a place of hope, because tomorrow is a new day and his mercies are new every day. And then, yes, I got to change all these physical things, which is probably the most logical and easy at that point. And in our industry, I think people are more in tune at looking at the emotional and the physical, but there's not a lot that do all three, right? There's not like the faith, the emotions, and the physical. And in the Western side of the allopathic, it's all physical. And good luck to you if you make it. And if you don't, then, this pharmaceutical is your God, and it's going to take away all your pain. And it truly has become an idol. So that's probably how I would, every person that comes in to see me, I will tell them, I don't know the day and the way that God's going to say is your last. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I'm going to save your life, but I'll walk it with you, and I'll do 110% if you do. And even on days that you can only give 70, I'll still do 110%, because sometimes they need a hand up rather than a handout. So that's kind of how I walk it out. What about you?
Well, we resonate exactly with that. I had a friend that lost a loved one, and I just sent her the footprints in the sand. I said, on my toughest days, I lean on this because I know I'm not in it alone, and I try to build a bridge which in no way alienates anybody, because we have people of all different faiths and no faith, but we love them all because we're all brothers and sisters, and we're gonna keep going in that direction. But when they tend to come in, it's usually something physical that brings them in. So I move that up a little bit, but I say, consider your stressors, which we could call that emotional. We could call it spiritual. Those are likely what's setting up all this decline, and then the poor biochemical choices, and we keep moving on. So if we can get you peace of mind, if we can get you hope, if we can get you optimistic about your future, it's a lot easier to make a better choice. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking of a couple different bridges. I want to go to the Magnificent Seven and your little intake on each of them, and then your expertise with labs. But with the Magnificent Seven, so similar question. We've got to eat right, drink right, think right, move right, sleep right, poop right, talk right. I'm imagining each person might have a different starting point, but what's most universal of that list in people that you see?
Oh, well, it depends. I don't get a lot of super uneducated people now. I think there's so much information out there that people are at least trying to eat better. Right now, the big confusion is that gluten-free and dairy-free meat equals healthy. That's not always true. And so we have to take a deeper dive with those people. But obviously, the easiest thing to control is what you put in your mouth. So I will start with an intake on nutrition. Not only am I looking for things that may be inflammatory with them, but I'm also looking for gaps in their variety, right? What aren't they getting? You have women that'll come in and they're pastatarians. They love the pasta and they'll have the bagel and they'll do all these things, but they don't have a lot of protein. And then you have men that have come in and they're carnivores. They just eat protein all the time and so much protein, and they're having all kinds of gas and stomach issues. And I'm like, well, you ate a side of beef today. I would have a hard time digesting it too, you know? So I do start with eating. The second thing that I start with is sleeping. You can eat all the kale and exercise every day and drink all the water you want, but if you're not sleeping, you're not going to feel good. And we have to remember that, you know, two forms of torture were starving people and keeping them from sleeping. So we have to look at those two aspects and think, all right, how can we help improve? And most of the time, people are overeating because they're not sleeping, because they're trying to find that serotonin, that dopamine. They're carboholics, they're sugaraholics. They might even be drinking too much because they're not resting. They have no, and maybe sleeping's the wrong word. It's more of rest, right? Because you can be in a restful state during the day, but we're not. We're so heightened during the day and so stressed out all the time and always thinking about things. So that would probably be the top two. And then, you know, the third one is probably hydration for me. So I'll do eat right, sleep right, drink enough water so that biological processes have something to swim through. And then I'll go down the cascade of what does that person really need. So they're probably my top three questions.
You know, we're going to take a comprehensive history on everybody and find out what their habits are. And I remember one of my mentors said years ago, you know, everybody needs their number one non-negotiable self-care habit, and mine is sleep. You know, and another mentor said, hey, with a poor night's sleep, we're all tall 2-year-olds. And that's not a fun interaction. So I put sleep number one. And interestingly enough, now for me personally, poop right would be number two. You know, if I have a day where, and it's almost every single day, you know, you start the day with a good movement, and all of a sudden this day is much better. If I don't, I'm miserable. You know, I'm going to make sure that happens. And oddly enough, then the next thing besides that type of movement is moving my body. And not everybody's going to be the same. Then I go with hydration. Then I go with food. So there's a lot of different things going on there. There's a lot of variability. But I would suggest in our world, sleep is horrific. Nearly everybody's dehydrated. We've destroyed the food system, you know, and people aren't getting enough fiber to have good bowel movements. And it's just a horrific cascade. But now let's go into evaluation, because, you know, I was teaching a neurology series, actually, with a neurologist from Cornell in 2009. And even though he had a medical background, he said, you know, doctors in this country suffer from testophilia, love of testing. He said there's no test they wouldn't run. By the way, maybe a month or two later, I was lecturing at a major nutrition conference, and a guy owned a lab, and he got up there and he was bragging that every patient I see has $25,000 worth of labs.
Oh, my.
And then I got up after him. I said, you know, I don't have a single patient. And at that point, however many years it was, you know, maybe 15, 20 years, I said, I don't have a single patient that collectively I've ordered $25,000 on lab. And then you start showing them videos of people that were going to have their legs cut off and they still have them, and world champions that win. So if you know what you're looking for, and you certainly do, you know, we might start with physical exam and then let's lead to that blood magic. So is there any physical thing you're going to look at first and foremost?
Oh, absolutely. Just like our doctors used to when we were kids. I look at their face, I look at their tongue, and I look at their nails. You know, the physical discernment of the body, what your body looks like and feels like, is actually good. You want to use those physical symptoms as a pathway of asking better questions. So, you know, I do face mapping. And I mean, eyebrows lost at the end of the eyebrows is thyroid, right? You can see adrenals at the corner of the eye. You can see constipation, what I call panda face, like from the nose down around the chin. You can see acne on the chin. That's going to be hormones. People would have redness at their cheeks or rosacea, obviously digestion. So the body's going to speak, right? Creases on your ears. That's going to tell me you have cardiovascular concerns that we need to take a look at. Could it be blood pressure? Could it be whatever that looks like? Diabetes, you'll have lines in front of your ears. So there's all kinds of things. You can see thyroid on the neck. And then I'll look at the nails. And what I do is called trifecta, right? So I'm going to look at a hint on the face. Do I see that hint on the tongue? And do I see it in the nails? And if I connect 2 or 3, I'm going to ask a better question. It's not diagnostic, but if I say, oh, well, I noticed that the moons on your nails are missing and you have lines running on your neck. Any thyroid history or anything with you with thyroid, or have you gained weight, or, is your hair? And they're like, oh my gosh, blah, 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 blah. And my mom had thyroid and my aunt, and I think I have it. So then I get into testing. Then I can do the appropriate test rather than, keep guessing all the things. So yes, physical is big. I'm also looking for puffiness. Or do they have any type of like inflammation, or I'll ask them. I look at their nails for coloring, candida, circulation. I also ask about their toenails. Not that I want to see those, Dr. Bob, but I will ask about them. I'm like, no, you don't have to take your shoes off. We're fine. And I ask about pain, because a lot of people come in for one thing, X, Y, or Z, and then you try to put them on a movement plan. And they're like, oh, well, I have this back thing. I can't, so I do ask about pain. I ask about rashes anywhere that I can't see, skin irritations, anything like that. And also mouth sores. I think the mouth is a big part that we miss and we don't really look at. So that's why I look at the tongue. I ask about the health of the gums. I'll ask if their gums bleed. I'm making them do the big smile. I look at their gums and make sure there's no periodontal, because that direct correlation, we know how that correlates with the body. So those are all my physical assessments.
Well, I love it, and so picture I'm a pretty structural guy. So I'm going to look at posture. I'm going to get height. I'm going to get weight. I'm going to get body composition through something easy called bioimpedance analysis. And, it's an easy bridge to, what would you consider your ideal weight, and then you start showing what their body comp is. And, do you understand the importance of hydration? We can show them that they're dehydrated. But then as I'm doing a physical exam, I want their posture to line up, which most people's posture is absolutely terrible. And then I'll even do a series of muscle testing. And now there's this term in the literature, which I can't believe it's just a year since I came across it, called myokines. And so we think of cytokines, cellular communication molecules. Myokines, there's now over 3,000 of them that have been identified. And we go back to Tufts University. They had a book called Biomarkers 2000 that came out in 2000. And they found out the greatest or most predictive marker of healthy aging was actually muscle mass. So you start looking at that, and, if they're not moving, they're not going to put on muscle mass. If they're in a catabolic state because of stress, or because insulin isn't working, or because they're profoundly inflamed, or usually all of the above, or horrifically toxic, well, then their body comp is going to shift. And there's so many different things that we can look at that. So, I've worked with acupuncturists over the years. I've employed a few of them. And I remember the last time I interviewed an acupuncturist, I asked her, that one happened to be a female. I said, so what do you look at? And she went through what you just said, but she also says, by the way, I'm going to smell them. It's like, okay, that could be unpleasant sometimes, but I mean, if you actually get up to someone, you actually smell their breath, well, you're going to get a pretty big hint, and you get close to their body, you get a hint, and hopefully you don't get a hint, hopefully it's just like there's nothing going on there, but there's almost no limit to what we can look at from the outside. But then when we start going on the inside, we speak the same language with a complete blood count with differential and maybe a comprehensive metabolic panel. And you said something very, very powerful, even at sometimes getting strong hints about cancer just from that level of assessment, which for people watching, relatively inexpensive to find out how many red cells, white cells you have, how many platelets, what's the distribution of white cells, what's the size of the red cells, how much hemoglobin do they carry, and the comprehensive metabolic panel, Chem 14. They look at electrolytes, liver, kidney, things like that, and blood proteins. So of those, what markers are you seeing most off, and what direction does that lead your thinking?
Yeah, so we do about the same thing. I do a baseline. I do CBC with differential, CMP. I do a full lipid panel and also serum iron. And I do that for everybody. Now, if I know someone's having thyroid issues or it's a male and he's coming to me for specific things, then I might run prostate. I might run, a few other things. With the CBC with differential, that is kind of like my foundational, because that's going to tell me about your immune system overall. Is it have enough to do what it can to overcome, right? For that pathology, if there's an infection. Or is it low methylating? Do you have low iron, low oxygen potential? And you just told us how important oxygen is, and a few other things. Most of the time, people are just hands down poor methylators. And basically that means that they are not repairing their cells and detoxifying appropriately through other pathways than the normal bowels, right? The bowels, the urinary, the lungs, the lymph, the skin. They're not cellularly detoxifying. So their cells are not cleaning themselves. They're not overcoming infection. They're not overcoming toxicity. They're not repairing the cell wall. They're not having good mitochondrial biogenesis where the cell splits. So that methylation pathway is extremely important. You can see that in a CBC with differential. And then you can also see what I call instigators. You can't necessarily call them infections because sometimes those instigators are chronic. They've been there for a long time and your body just hasn't had enough to silence them. And that's what a methyl group does. It pops onto a bacteria or a virus and it tells it to shut up and stop interfering
or our genes, by the way, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And silence, absolutely. And that's what, when we get turbo cancer or any type of cancer, bad cells aren't dying and they're giving bad messages and there's no silencer. So, it's like shooting a gun in the middle of the woods, but everyone can hear it. So it's just an interesting path, but the CBC with differential is what I'll look at first. And it's kind of what I'll go back to if I see anything else.
Well, let's go back. I want, just because for my own knowledge, I'm going to assume you're going mostly with mean corpuscular volume on that one. What number range do you like, or what are the markers on that CBC you're using?
Yeah. So for men and women, it's a little bit different. I think men require a little bit more iron and oxygen due to their muscle mass. So there are levels that are not in the normal range. You and I don't deal in normal because normal looks different on everybody.
Normal sick.
Period. I know. Yeah. Oh, that's a great way to put it. We deal in what's called functional ranges. And so functionally, we want to make sure that you have enough to actually be able to heal. And that's really important because I usually tell people once we get that blood number into functional, then the physical will change. You can't change the physical when the blood is imbalanced, and not just pH. It's when you don't have enough vitamin D. I mean, here's a great one, right? The vitamin D levels on a test drastically need redone. And I think understanding the history of blood work, that it did come from sick people, that it was a compilation of like 1,000 people that had gone to the hospital or doctor and had blood drawn. It's not from these healthy people, it's from sick people. So our levels are probably a little bit too low in some areas and too high in other areas. And so you have this huge range. Now, having a blood serum level of 30 for vitamin D is what they deem as normal. But you and I know, even with the most recent study during COVID that said 50 or higher is really what you need to prevent viral infection. Why have we not changed the blood work? Why have we not gone back and said, hey, this needs revised to 50 for the average American? Because if we know that viral infection is offset by blood serum levels of 50 for vitamin D, let's change the number. But that hasn't happened yet, Dr. Bob. Why hasn't that happened? So ranges for people can be, here and there, but they have to be functional for me. And to go through every set, I mean, I can pull out my notes. We can go through all those, but that would take some time.
Well, I want to take your course, right? You've got that course. Let's put in a plug for that. It's available. How do people get your blood interpretation course?
Well, I have an academy. It's called the Academy of Abiding Wellness, and the functional blood work is on there. And there's 2 videos in each one. So I break down the CBC with differential, the CMP, the lipid panel, and the serum iron. One is a general breakdown for everybody to understand, including practitioners, and it's valuable. But the second video in the CBC is more practitioner focused. So people, whatever level they're on, can learn at a basic level or an advanced level to go through that blood work course. So we'll post the link if you guys want to see it. I did do a podcast on the CBC with differential. I just went through it because I was like, let's just break this down for everybody. My goal, and I think your goal, is to help people prevent their own disease. There's not enough Dr. Bobs and Dr. Tracy's out there. I mean, you're brilliant. I love learning from you, talking to you. Your patients love you. The testimonials are incredible. Like, you have a gift, but there's only one of you, right? And so that's why you and I teach and do podcasts and talk to people about what they can do to empower themselves. And that's the best thing we can do, is teach people to prevent their own disease. So I teach blood work classes so that people can just go to LabCorp or go to Quest or wherever they want to go, get their own blood draws and sit down with the little number graph I give them and figure out what they need. And then if they can't figure it out, or it's something that they can't quite overcome, that's where you and I can come in and help strategize with them and be like, oh, you're almost there, but you need this, right? And that makes our jobs easier. It makes them feel empowered. And so that's my hope. I want people to fire me eventually. I want them to be like, thanks, it's been great. I've learned a lot. And now I'm going to go and be healthy and tell 5 friends about you. That's what we want. That's the best thing we can do.
When I think about these blood panels, and, I've been to enough courses, I'm sure you have as well. There's too many people that take one item at a time and say, this number's off, do this number's off, do that, without understanding that there's a whole pattern and a whole individual, and there might be just this one spot that runs it. A couple comments on a few things. People may not know what methylation is. A methyl group is just a carbon with 3 hydrogens. It's a very abundant molecule in the body, or at least it should be. It's estimated that we methylate 1 billion times a second. Without it, we can't detoxify. We can't respond to hormones. We can't make brain chemistry. We can't mask our DNA. We can't repair our DNA. And when I started teaching about epigenetics and genetics, I tell people, look, every cell in your body has the ability to make every other cell at every other moment in time. I said, so my joke was, if people would get it, I'd say, I have the genetics, and you do too, to start growing a colon out of my chin right now. Now, why don't I do that? Because of methylation. We're silencing the things that we're looking for. And what they found very consistently across the board with cancer is aberrant methylation patterns. Things that should have been turned off weren't, and things that should have been turned on weren't. And now we have an absolute mess in what we're looking at. Then we go with vitamin D, and it's so interesting. One of the more clever articles I read about vitamin D years ago said, after 40, we will make less vitamin D with sunshine in our liver and kidneys, et cetera. So the comment was, maybe that's nature's way of thinning the herd. Because it's life critical. Every cell type of the body has vitamin D receptors. It's proven now against well over a dozen cancers. It's an inverse related to autoimmunity. The vast majority of diabetics have low vitamin D. And by the way, when we start looking at how low they are, oh my gosh, you and I might have a slightly different range. Over time, I've come to say I like it between 100 and 120. And my lab upper limit is 100. And people say, wait a minute, I'm at 102. I must be poisoning myself. No. And then National Institutes of Health showed 25 years ago, they could raise animal levels to over 400 without toxic side effects. But they just arbitrarily picked 100. So how fascinating is that? So way back when I could look at blood under the microscope, and I studied on one of the best PhD hematologists on the planet, a guy named Philip Paul Huxter III, we would look at hypersegmented neutrophils as a clear indicator of methylation dysfunction. Of course, you can see big red cells, big white cells, et cetera. The size of the cell makes a difference too, but that's just a tip of the iceberg when it comes to methylation.
Mm-hmm. No, it's good. I always say the life is in the blood. By the time it gets there, it's been there a long time. So, to get us out of the abyss, it might take a few months because the body's going to turn over about every 90 days, every cell, every organ. And so, why guess when we can test, right? We can test. And I don't think we need $25,000 worth of testing, but having a baseline. And the other thing is it's tangible. Men especially, and I'm not picking on the guys, but men especially like to see, they're competitive. So they bring in their blood work and their cholesterol's way up. And I explained to them, like, cholesterol's a good guy, but we don't want him hanging around. We want him to go where he needs to go, So we do want to modulate cholesterol and triglycerides and all the things. And they change the diet and they do the workouts and they're doing all the things. And they come back and they have their blood work done and their cholesterol dropped by 50. And they're like, yes, so it's a tangible measurement for people. The other thing is you can see a lot of things in it before things happen. And you can offset certain things by giving the right nutrients. So you talked about cancer. Albumin for me, if I look at that, if it's low, that's an indication that you're not getting enough essential amino acids for the right communication for apoptosis in your body. Your body's not activating a little transcriber called P53. And P53 is going to tell cells to stop, drop, and roll. I'm going to be like, whoa, wait, something's wrong with you. I got to check with my guys over here to see if we can fix you. And if not, we got to pop you so that you die and we use your parts for other cells. And so that P53 is absent in all tumors and cancer cells. It's like that it never got turned on to tell that cell to stop, drop, and roll. So you get all these bad, sick, injured cells that keep replicating. And in order to survive the system, they mutate and they give the wrong messages. And that's called cancer, right? In whatever form it is. So albumin, especially for people that I wouldn't say as a predictive, because if I see it too low and I have other things by itself, it's not a diagnostic. It gets me to ask better questions, and it might get me to get more testing. So, or it just might be that you don't eat enough protein, or you have terrible digestion and you're not breaking down amino acids. But especially when people are during active chemo, it'll be the number one thing I look at. So I get a lot of people that have gone through or are currently in chemotherapy, and I'll look at that first. And absolutely, hands down, I will give them a supplement of amino acids. Absolutely. Because their body's starving and it's stopping the communication, and it doesn't have the ability for hematopoiesis, right? Stem cell regeneration. It doesn't have the ability to communicate well. So that's a big one for me when people come in. Is one of the big ones that I look at.
Well, there's so many things you said in that we could, who knows, we could teach a whole course just on that last line of thinking. What I always tell people is, our cells don't multiply, they divide. And before they divide, there's a checkpoint, like you just said, and your stop, drop, and roll. If people aren't familiar with that, when we were growing up, if you were on fire, that's what they said to do. Get a blanket, drop on the ground, roll yourself up. Why you want to put that fire out? Well, those cancer cells, they're not getting the message that, hey, we're not supposed to go beyond our own environment. So many times I've taught cancer lectures around the world, and let's say I have a nice audience and they're out there. I'll say, I look out here, you're all beautiful people. I don't see anybody sitting on anybody else's lap, right? And certainly in a seminar, that wouldn't be totally appropriate. But, if you have someone you're fond of and they want to sit on your lap, that's fine. But I said, keep in mind also when it comes time for lunch, you're going to have your plate and the other person has theirs. And when you need to use the restroom, you step out and you go away from everybody and you go. Well, what do cancer cells do? They don't care about your space. They're going to crowd. They're going to push. Your space doesn't matter to them. They're going to eat your food. They're going to drink your drink, and they're going to poop and pee all over you. And we don't want that happening. And by the way, if we let those cells divide, now we're in trouble. But that P53 that you're talking about, that's called the tumor suppressor gene. And you're right. When that's working, we don't get cancer. When it's not, we do. And we don't necessarily want to oversimplify cancer. There's some people that say, well, cancer is a metabolic disease. Just don't spike your blood sugar. Now, there's more to it than that. And especially, you also mentioned the term turbo cancer. There was a study out of Japan that came out this week. I don't know if you saw it, but they actually have the freedom of sharing medical information. Anybody that got 3 or more jabs in this recent thing that was going around, the incidence of all types of cancer in every demographic, and it wasn't just all types of cancer, it's all types of cancer deaths are up in every single demographic. And wow. John Campbell, who's a great educator out of the UK, he brought in a guy that he predicted this more than a year ago. He saw patients that were in total remission from cancer, doing great. Then suddenly it's like cancer came back with an absolute vengeance in the fastest period of time he'd ever seen. And he said in all his years of treating cancer patients, The only time he'd have a major regression like that, and never that fast, was when someone had a very traumatic life event. Someone was killed, an unexpected divorce, a bankruptcy. And those are the three examples he used. But he said, now I started seeing people coming in. None of that had happened. What's different? It was after the third jab. And he saw that pattern. So he sounded the alarm over a year ago. And guess what? They're still recommending in this country those jabs if you're 6 months or older. If you're listening to this, certainly wake up and share it. I have no idea how some people are still so fooled by this.
Mm-hmm. I don't either. And I think it's just cognitive dissonance, right? They don't want to be wrong. It's the same thing with childhood jabs. Some kids get injured and some don't. And when you talk to a mom about it, some moms they can't, because if they would realize what had happened to their child because of something, the same thing with getting this jab, for COVID, if those people would admit, then they're admitting that all the things that they're hearing about the destruction of their body could potentially be true. And so let's put a voice of hope over this, right?
Yep.
So the way that jab worked was methylation, phosphorylation, acetylation, and deactivation of P53. 1, 2, 3, 4. So if we talk about that in a voice of hope, would it be plausible to say DMG, dimethylglycine, for methylation, right? And then N-acetylcysteine for acetylation, and then perhaps SPMs for phosphorylation, and then activation of P53, we could maybe use CBD, turmeric. I mean, name your activator, right? So there is hope. Even that, the body, exactly as we started out, it never does anything wrong. It's protecting you. In order to stop the spread, it's going to downgrade and preserve. That's what it does. That's why in times of infection or pain, cells get rushed to an area and you get swollen. That's why people gain weight. It's because fat metabolically will slow down processes. And so I always tell people, you're not fat, you're inflamed. You got something else going on metabolically that your body's trying to slow something down. So it's going to pack the areas with fat just to metabolically preserve you from dying is what it's doing. It's like, it's a preservation. So if you have that jab and you're worried, I would absolutely say reach out to Dr. Bob or myself so that we can help you modulate that immune system default that's happening. It doesn't have to end the way everyone's speaking it. There is hope. So I guess that's what I would say is when we look at the process of what it did, and everyone's worried about the spike protein. Your body's going to take that out eventually. If you have enough methylation, phosphorylation, acetylation, and detoxification, it'll take it out. It will. It'll dumb it down like any other virus. I don't believe personally that that's a forever thing.
Well, yeah, I'm going to agree with that. And now they're suggesting 1 in 4, maybe 1 in 5 people are going to suffer long jab. And then there was an article that came out also, not my favorite intervention, but nicotine patch. Nicotine would bind to that ACE2 receptor with 30 times the potency of the spike protein. And the way I'd share that with my patients, and that's not the only way to do it, ginkgo and lobelia also competitively bind for it. And then we use proteolytic enzymes. And by the way, I like plant-based proteases, that can digest that spike protein and get people ahead of that. But we start looking at people that are struggling, and what the article showed is the vast majority of them with the nicotine patch, just 3.5 milligrams a day, 7 to 10 days, most of their long COVID is gone. Now, why doesn't it work for everybody? Well, just the same factors that you had mentioned. You like to call it your alphabet soup.
Okay.
The SPM is the activated form of omega-3s. The N-acetylcysteine is a precursor of glutathione, the body's predominant detoxification. But you're talking about acetylation, another genetic protector and modifier. Methylation, you can't get enough of that. You start looking, and where would we get methyls before? If we're eating real food that would give life, we'd be getting life from our food, but that's all depleted from that absolute processed garbage. Then you start looking at CBD, and we could probably spend a long time talking about that. I grew up in the kind of household, my dad was a Marine, and you would never think about ever considering a drug, marijuana. You know, we would call them stoners when I was growing up. No, don't be a stoner. And you know what? Some of those people had realized that there was something in that plant that was profoundly good. And so I read the marijuana manifesto, the cannabis manifesto, 50 different PubMeds, watched a bunch of different YouTubes, the endocannabinoid system we've learned for about 30 years. It takes care of our body. So is, cannabis a good plant? You better believe it. Is there potential to abuse? Everything can be abused.
Everything.
So,
you eat a bush of apples, so you're going to feel it,
Yep. So we're a little over an hour now, which is probably about the sweet spot. So I'm thinking we need to do another one at another date and time, but we'll wrap this one up. So if you could share one thing with the listeners or viewers, because there are videos going out with this too. So we'll pull off the MP3, the MP4, and we'll share that with the world. But what would that one thing be that you'd want to share?
Never lose hope. God has made us fearfully and wonderfully made. Our bodies are created in the image of him. Being in his likeness is a whole different thing. But I do believe that God has given us all things here on the earth for our time spent here. And I think if we know how to use them appropriately and in the right amounts at the right time, when we give our body what it needs, it'll do what it needs. So that's my message out there. There's never a time where you should lose hope. And if somebody says, I'm sorry, I can't fix that, cure that, go ask somebody else. That's what I would say to do.
Yeah. Well, and just on that comment, people often say, sorry, that can't be cured. And I like you said, instead of saying, I don't know enough to help you, look for someone else, they say, no, you're hopeless. Right. And that's the wrong message always for everybody. If I were to answer that back, and I've answered this many times during interviews or whatever, love yourself. Zealously inspect all things that you allow to enter your mind, your heart, your soul, and your body. And I do mean zealously, with a passion where you understand that your life absolutely depends on every decision you make. So let's make a bunch of good ones.
Amen.
Well, what an absolute joy. I think I will wind down the recording, and I'm not having an easy time picking up this right arm because I did have surgery, but there we go.